Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to Back to the Roots, Mapping the Mind Through Abhidharma with Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, a very special event that is part of this year's Vajrayana Online immersion course. My name is Alexandria, and I'm coming to you from a very rainy Portland, Oregon, and I have the joy of being today's host for the program. Today we'll have the great delight and blessing from hearing from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, and then later on a Q&A session with Tsuma Kunsang Palmo. What a lovely coming together. Before welcoming on Tsuma Kunsang La, I just have a few things to cover. As you can see, the chat had been open, and it's really wonderful, to see the truly international community that has gathered. In fact, we have 6 translators working currently to ensure that everyone on the Zoom audience can listen and understand. Russian, French, Portuguese, Chinese, Spanish, and German, and our English-speaking friends are on YouTube. Today's online audience is both on Zoom and YouTube, and to get a better feel of who's participating and listening on Zoom, we would like to launch a poll. This one will be, what language are you listening in? And so again, this is for our friends on Zoom. We should have a pretty small number of English speakers on the Zoom call. Oh, wonderful. And I just received from Lucy that we have over 500 people watching our live broadcast on YouTube. So excellent. So we can see we have a large amount of Chinese speaking, whether that's Mandarin or Cantonese, I apologize. Russian, Spanish, French, Dutch, Portuguese. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating in the poll. Thank you. And we also do want to give a deep thank you to all the English speakers, as we said, that have decided to watch on YouTube and leaving the bandwidth and space for those that need translation here. Today's session will be roughly 90 minutes. For the first hour, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi will be giving a teaching on certain aspects of the Abhidharma. And following that, for the final half hour, there'll be a live Q&A session moderated by Tsuma Kunsang La. Please submit your questions by scanning the QR code that we'll share momentarily on the screen, or through the link that will also be posted in the chat. I'll just give a moment for those to come up. Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Eduardo. And so for the questions, don't worry, you can submit them in any language, and our magical Google Doc will automatically translate them. And we do request that you keep your questions related to today's topic and as concise as possible. We will be selecting the questions that are most related to the teachings today. Thank you so much for doing your best to work with us on that. And for any Zoom technical questions or issues, please submit those via the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I would now like to introduce someone who is known and loved by many of us, our dear friend and Tergar facilitator, Tsuma Kunsang La. For those of you who might not know Tsuma La, let me share just a bit. Tsuma Kunsang Palmo originated from England, traveled and worked around the world as an art teacher in international schools for over a decade. On a trip to Nepal, she encountered Lama Zopa Rinpoche and was so inspired by the teachings that she chose to stay in Asia and immersed her life in the Dharma. Soon after that, she traveled to Himachal Pradesh in North India, where she met Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo and was further inspired by her guidance and teachings. Tsuma Kunsang La then went on to complete a 3-year retreat at Sherbling Monastery in North India under the guidance of Mingyur Rinpoche. Continuing to take teachings from Mingyur Rinpoche, Kunsang La serves as a meditation and Dharma teacher for Tergar's Joy of Living in Vajrayana Online, Tergar's Retreat, and is part of the faculty at Tergar Institute and Ulsaling Monastery in Kathmandu, Nepal. In 2021, she was invited to teach in Antigua and Trinidad for Bodhicharya, an international organization founded by Rinpoche Tuku Rinpoche. She now divides her time sharing what she's learned through her years of study and practice in Kathmandu, India, and the Caribbean, and is a dear friend on the path to all who have the good fortune of meeting her warm heart. Welcome, Sumala. It is so wonderful to be with you.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. So it really is with deep joy and heartfelt respect that we welcome Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi to this special event, part of our year-long Abhidharma transmission within the Tergar community. A revered scholar, translator, and teacher, Venerable Bodhi has profoundly shaped the study and practice of the Buddha's teachings in the modern world. Born in New York in 1944, he trained in philosophy before entering monastic life in Sri Lanka in the early 1970s. Since then, he's devoted his life to the Dharma through deep scholarship as well as compassionate action. As longtime editor of the Buddhist Publication Society and now a teacher at Chuang Monastery in New York, he's offered extraordinary clarity to English-speaking students through his acclaimed translations of the Pali Canon, his landmark works, including the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, the connected discourses of the Buddha, and the numerical discourses of the Buddha have become essential resources for students, teachers, and practitioners worldwide. Beyond scholarship, Venerable Bodhi founded Buddhist Global Relief in 2008, bringing the Dharma to life through projects focused on hunger, relief, sustainable agriculture, and education in vulnerable communities. As we continue our journey into the Abhidharma, it is a true honor to welcome someone who embodies both rigorous inquiry and compassionate service. We're so grateful to have you with us, Venerable Bodhi, and look forward to your teaching on the first chapter of your book, a comprehensive manual of Abhidharma, and the insights you'll be sharing with us in response to questions from the audience after your teaching. So thank you so much, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Please, would you like to come on and share your wisdom and your great heart with us all? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, so let me begin by thanking the Tergar community for inviting me to contribute a session on the Abhidharma in what I understand is a year-long program in the Abhidharma initiated by Mingyur Rinpoche. First, what I'm going to do today is first make some general comments about the Abhidharma and then focus on one of the main projects of the Abhidharma in the Pali or Theravada tradition, which is to classify all the different possible states of mind or states of consciousness which enter into the liberative program of the Abhidharma system. Okay, first, as for the meaning of Abhidharma, the traditional view in the Theravada tradition is that the Abhidharma was taught by the Buddha himself during his 7th rains retreat. During this rains retreat, according to the traditional account, he went to the Deva world, the Tavatingsa Deva world, and for the 3 months of the rains retreat, he taught the Abhidharma to the Devas, the deities, but also he would transmit the method of his explanation to the Venerable Sariputta, and Venerable Sariputta is the one who elaborated the outlines given by the Buddha into the texts that come to constitute the Abhidharma Pitaka, the collection of canonical Abhidharma treatises. So that's the traditional account, but from the standpoint of, we call critical historical scholarship, we would see the Abhidharma as actually emerging through a gradual process of evolution. The term Abhidharma occurs in the oldest texts, in the Nikayas, the Sutta Pitaka, but in those texts, the word Abhidharma is used not as a kind of discourse that the Buddha gives to either the deities or the monks, but it always occurs in relation to discussions amongst the monks themselves. So we find the expression, the monks were engaged in an Abhidhamma talk. So it seems here that an Abhidhamma talk was a discussion between monks in which the monks would explore, probably through a question and answer process, issues relating to the Dhamma that take us to a somewhat more detailed and technical quality, and have a somewhat more detailed and technical quality than the discourses of the Buddha himself. And so the word Abhidhamma comes to take on the meaning of what is additional to the Dhamma. And in the Theravada tradition, it's sometimes understood as the more advanced Dhamma or the higher Dhamma. But I think that would be a misunderstanding of the original sense of the term, which would be rather a more technical and detailed treatment of the fundamental principles taught by the Buddha, with those principles constituting the Dhamma. Okay, there are certain continuities between the teaching of the Dhamma in the Nikayas or in the suttas and the Abhidhamma. So in the Buddha's direct teaching, the aim of the Dhamma is to show the way to release from samsara, from the cycle of repeated birth and death. And according to the Buddha, the root causes of our migration in samsara are ignorance and craving. Of these two, the more fundamental is ignorance. And so what is needed to gain liberation from samsara is the antidote to ignorance, which is wisdom, right understanding, right cognition. That is the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. And so what is right cognition? According to the suttas, it is the direct knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. So one has to gain direct knowledge of the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, which is to be fully understood. One has to abandon the origin of suffering, which is craving and the associated defilements. One has to realize the end of suffering, which is nibbana, and one has to practice or cultivate the way to the end of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, or more broadly, the 37 Bodhisattva, the factors conducive to enlightenment. And so from one angle, the Abhidhamma can be regarded as a detailed investigation of these Four Noble Truths, more detailed than the treatment in the suttas. So it provides a detailed analysis of the truth of suffering, treating it by way of the five aggregates, the 12 sense bases, the 18 elements, and other groups of phenomena. It has detailed enumeration of the cause of suffering, the defilements, and of the factors that lead to liberation, enumerating and treating the interrelationships between all of these bodhipakkhiyadhammas, the factors conducive to enlightenment. But where the suttas are more, excuse me, are mainly practical in their emphasis, the Abhidhamma is more theoretical and comprehensive. It attempts, as I see it, the Abhidhamma attempts to establish a theoretical model that can accommodate all the factors mentioned within the suttas, bringing all of these sutta teachings together, the five aggregates, the sense bases, and so on, bringing them all together into one comprehensive scheme that assigns each factor its place within the overall architecture of the Buddha's teaching. Okay, there are several features that are distinctive of the Abhidharma method. So in earlier program that I gave, I enumerated three distinctive factors. One is the Dhamma theory, which attempts to enumerate all the basic factors of experience, all of the basic phenomena that constitute the experiential field. The second factor is what's called an attribute matika, that is a list of contrasting and complementary qualities to be used as a scheme for classifying phenomena. And then the third is a detailed analysis of consciousness, a way of mapping all the dhammas according to their relationship to the mind. And it's this third aspect that I'm going to be focusing upon today. Okay, here, when we come to this classification of consciousness, we find that the key word, the key term to indicate an act of consciousness is the word citta. It's C-I-T-T-A. We're going to come to that word when we look at the text. So in the suttas, the word citta is used roughly as equivalent to our English word mind, and it's generally used as a singular. So there's just the one cittam, singular, the mind. And the suttas treat citta as a unitary phenomenon. It's, of course, always changing. It's not a permanent self, but citta is just like the way you use the English word mind. It's the basis of our emotions, volitions. It's the state or the aspect of our being that is defiled, that has to be trained, tamed, developed, cultivated, and ultimately liberated. In the Abhidhamma, the idea of citta is broken down into a multiplicity of types of citta, states of consciousness, or acts of mind, frames of mind, um, occasions of mind. And so the Abhidhamma distinguishes many different types of cittas, classes of cittas, which are organized into, as I said, a comprehensive scheme, which gives us a kind of map of the mind, organized and classified according to the aims of the Buddha's teaching. And so, though it's sometimes said that the Abhidhamma is the Buddha psychology, I think this can be a bit misleading, since unlike Western psychology, the Abhidhamma does not intend to give us an objective description of the mind, which accords with a Western scientific model. And it's not a system of psychotherapy intended to deal with psychological states like neuroses, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and so on, but rather it's a map of the mind directed to the aims of Buddhist spiritual practice. And so what are these aims? So I enumerate three aims of Buddhist practice, which determine the shape of the map that the Abhidhamma provides us with, the map of the mind. First aim is to avoid those states of mind, those defiled states of mind that create unwholesome karma, that result in suffering, that lead to lower states of rebirth and extend our migration in samsara, in the round of rebirths. The second aim is to show us the wholesome mental states that create good or wholesome karma that lead to happiness and eventually culminate or that culminate in higher types of rebirth. And then the third aim is to show us how to generate and intensify those wholesome states that lead to world transcending liberation. These are what are called the Lokuttara states of mind, the world transcending states of mind. Okay, so that is sort of a broad overview of first of the Abhidharma and then of the typology of mind that we find in the Abhidharma. And now what I'm going to do is to share my screen, and we'll be going through the typology of mind, the classification of chittas that we find in the Abhidharma system. Okay, let us hope that I can successfully share my screen. Okay, is this successful?
Yes.
Okay, so the Abhidhamma has, you could see in its classification of chittas, these momentary states of mind, it distinguishes 89 chittas, and these can be through a different method that we might touch on. These could be elaborated further into 121 chittas or states of mind. Now, first, the to take the broad contours of this typology, there are two complementary schemes that are used for classifying the chittas. One is the plane of the chitta, or the plane of mind or consciousness, and the second are the types of states of consciousness or kinds of states of consciousness. Now, according to plane, there are four planes of consciousness, which we can see here. One is the sense sphere plane, another is the fine material plane, a third is the immaterial plane, and the fourth is the supramundane or world transcending plane. Okay, now for those of you who know something about Buddhist cosmology, you can see at a glance that the first three planes of consciousness correspond to the three planes of existence in Buddhist cosmology. So we speak about the sense sphere plane of existence, or sometimes it could be translated as the desire realm, which is said to comprise the hell realms, the realm of the ghosts, the animal realm, the realm of the pretas or spirits, human beings, and the six lower heavenly realms. Then there is the fine material plane of existence, or sometimes called the form realm, which comprises a number of superior divine realms of existence corresponding to the jhanas. And then there is the immaterial plane of existence or formless plane of existence, which consists of four realms of existence. The base of infinite space, base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, but there's a difference now between plane of consciousness and plane of existence. The plane of consciousness comprises the states of consciousness that are typical of a particular plane of existence. And so the sense sphere chittas are those states of consciousness which are typical of the sense sphere realm of existence. The fine material sphere chittas are the states of consciousness that are typical of the fine material plane of existence, and the immaterial sphere chittas are the states of consciousness that are typical of the immaterial or formless plane of existence. But states of consciousness are not states of consciousness of a particular sphere or particular plane are not confined to the plane of existence of which they are typical. For instance, we are human beings. Now, if we practice intensive samadhi meditation and we attain the jhanas, the states of deep meditative absorption, the states of the chittas occurring in the jhanas are the chittas of the fine material sphere, but they are occurring to us, human beings, living in the sense sphere realm of existence. If we go beyond the jhanas, we can develop the immaterial chittas, the immaterial sphere chittas. For example, we might attain the immaterial attainment of the base of boundless space, of infinite space. In that case, we are human beings, but we're experiencing the immaterial sphere chittas, the chittas that are typical of those beings existing in the immaterial realm of existence. And conversely, say the beings existing in the divine realms that make up the fine material sphere, the fine material plane, those divine beings can give rise to chittas accompanied by greed or by delusion, by conceit and other defilements. In that case, they'll be experiencing sense sphere chittas, even though they are beings living in the fine material sphere or fine material plane of existence. Okay, then the fourth type of sphere of consciousness or plane of chittas are the chittas that bring liberation from the entire cycle of repeated birth and death. So those are the supramundane chittas, which we can see are divided into the Four Noble Paths and the Four Noble Fruits. We're going to be coming back to these later. So this is the classification of citta by way of plane. So the four planes, the sense sphere chittas, fine material sphere chittas, immaterial sphere chittas, and supramundane chittas. Okay, the next method for classifying chittas, another fourfold scheme. And let me go to another table. Okay, is the table coming through clearly? Just confirm.
Yes, it is coming through clearly. Venerable Law, if it's at all possible to just zoom in maybe a little, but if not, it is clear. We can see.
Okay, to increase the size?
If you could. Oh, wonderful. I think that, thank you so much. Thank you, Venerable. Beautiful.
Okay, so with this scheme, we have another four categories for classifying chittas by way of kind. So we have four kinds of chittas: unwholesome, wholesome, resultant, and functional. Actually, this table, maybe there's another table. Let me try another table. Okay, I'll leave this. I'll leave this. Is it still the right size?
So Venerable, you stopped sharing. So if you re-share again, we will see. And these are the sweet human touches that make these events so nice. So thank you, Venerable, for sharing. Yeah.
Okay, I think this chart might be better. Okay. And let me, okay, I think the size is okay.
So Venerable, if you would re-share your screen currently,
Oh,
we're not
okay.
seeing it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. We can now see. Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, now I'll increase the size.
Excellent. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Is the size satisfactory?
It is on my end.
Okay, I could push it up a few points.
Oh,
Okay.
wonderful. Yes, I think people will be delighted. Thank you.
Okay, so here we have the 89 cheetahs divided by way of kind. Actually, there's an intersection here of kind and sphere. So we have unwholesome cheetahs. So those would be cheetahs that are accompanied by the what are called the unwholesome roots, greed, hatred, and delusion, some combination of those unwholesome roots. The next are sense sphere wholesome or wholesome cheetahs. And so you can see the unwholesome cheetahs, there are 12 kinds, which we're going to come to. And the unwholesome cheetahs are all pertain to the sense sphere. There's no such thing as unwholesome cheetahs in the fine material sphere or the immaterial sphere, much less among the supramundane in the supramundane sphere. So we have the unwholesome cheetahs, 12. Then we have wholesome cheetahs, of which there are 8 pertaining to the sense sphere, 5 to the fine material sphere, 4 to the immaterial sphere, and 4 to the supramundane sphere. Then we have the third and fourth kinds are resultants and functionals. The resultants are the results of karma, representing the cheetahs that bring about the ripening of karma. So technically, the result of karma is a cheetah, called a vipaka cheetah, a resultant cheetah. And then there's another class of cheetahs called functional cheetahs that just perform particular functions, but they're neither wholesome nor unwholesome, and they're not the result of karma. And both of these are karmically indeterminate, neither unwholesome nor wholesome. So we have the resultants, 23 in the sense sphere, 5 in the fine material sphere, 4 in the immaterial sphere, and 4 of the supramundane sphere. And then we have certain functional cheetahs. We don't have to analyze them here. So when we take the sum total, you would say from the sense sphere, there are 54 cheetahs, fine material sphere, 15, immaterial sphere, 12, and supramundane sphere, since we have the 4 paths and 4 fruits, there are 8. So that gives us the total of 89. Okay, so those are the 2 tetrads, 2 sets of 4 by which we classify these 89 kinds of cheetahs. 4 planes of consciousness, sense sphere, fine material sphere, immaterial sphere, and the supramundane level. And then 4 kinds or types, unwholesome, wholesome, resultant, and functional. Now we're going to go back and look in more detail at these types of cheetahs. And I should mention that in 2013, I gave a 4-day Abhidharma retreat, and it took me about 2.5 days to go through all of the 89 types of citas, giving about 5 lectures a day over 2.5 days. So I'm trying to compress everything I covered in that retreat into this 1 hour session. So I'm going to have to skip over a lot of details. But if you want to find this material in greater detail, you can either get a copy of the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma, or you can go to YouTube and put in my name, Abhidharma Retreat 2013, and then you should come up with that series of that program that I gave over a 4-day weekend. Okay, now I think I'm going, is it sharing? Do you see the table of
Yes,
unwholesome citas?
yes, we are
Okay,
seeing the table of all the many chittas. Thank you.
okay. Now I'm going to expand that, and the size is okay, or I could
If
increase.
you could maybe, yeah, that's much better. Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, so the unwholesome citas are distinguished first by way of the root of that citta. So roots are particular mental factors that occur within a citta and that give it its moral or ethical quality. And so, according to the Buddha's teachings, and we find this repeatedly in the suttas, there are 3 unwholesome roots: greed, also known as lust, craving, desire, a selfish desire, attachment, and so on, passion, with all the various degrees of desirous attachment, hatred, which comprises aversion, ill will, resentment, irritation, and so forth, and delusion or ignorance. And now, according to, I think, both the suttas and the Abhidhamma, greed and hatred are incompatible and that they never occur together. They cannot occur together within the same state of consciousness. There can be close interactions between greed and hatred. For example, if I'm greedy for a particular honor or possession, and somebody else is competing with me for that honor or possession, I might have aversion or hatred towards that person. And so there's an interrelationship between greed and hatred. But from the microscopic point of view of individual cittas, the two are not occurring in the same momentary state of mind, state of consciousness. But delusion is present in all unwholesome cittas. So the cittas that are said to be rooted in greed are also rooted in delusion. The cittas that are rooted in hatred or aversion are also rooted in delusion. So these first 10 cittas have 2 roots. 8 are rooted in greed and delusion. 2 are rooted in hatred and delusion. But there are certain other cittas that are rooted in delusion, but not accompanied by greed or hatred. So the Abhidhamma classifies 2 such cittas, which are said to be rooted exclusively in greed. And so now, taking first the cittas rooted in greed, the Abhidhamma enumerates 8 cittas, which are distinguished by, I think, 3 dichotomies. One is the feeling, a second is association, and the third is prompting. I'll take each of these in turn. Okay, so states of mind rooted in greed can be accompanied by a pleasant feeling, which is called somanassa, translated joy. For example, I like chocolate. Somebody gives me a chocolate bar. When I receive it, a state of mind occurs, and it's accompanied, I look at the bar, dark chocolate, 80%, joy or pleasure arises. Equanimity, okay, somebody gives me, here I should explain, the Pali word used here is upekkha, which we usually translate with equanimity, but this is not the superior mental state of equanimity, but rather its neutral feeling. Okay, so this would be the feeling that arises when I get something that I desire, but I'm not particularly excited about it. Okay, so I'm a bit hungry, so I get a plate with simple rice and dal and some green beans. I'm not particularly enamored of any of those foods, but since I'm hungry, I have a kind of greed for the food, but I'm indifferent to those types of food. So the feeling is upekkha. I think it would be better to translate this as indifferent feeling. And so we distinguish four chittas rooted in greed, accompanied by joyful feeling, four accompanied by indifferent feeling. Okay, the second basis for distinguishing is whether that state of mind accompanied by greed is also accompanied by a wrong view. And this is, I think, this elevation of the view to an important position is based very it's strongly connected to the sutta teaching, where the Buddha emphasizes the need to overcome wrong views. And in some of the suttas, he gives detailed classifications of types of wrong views. And these wrong views in the suttas are said to be connected with craving. Craving is a synonym for greed. So we have some states of mind rooted in greed that are associated with wrong view, and some that are not associated with wrong view, that are dissociated from wrong view. So that is another basis for distinguishing the chittas. Okay, then the third basis for the third basis for distinguishing the chittas, the third dichotomy, is whether the chitta is prompted or not. And so there might be a case where, okay, let us say I like ice cream, and somebody says, let's go get ice cream. And so as soon as that person makes that suggestion, I immediately jump at it. I want ice cream. And so that chitta is spontaneous, natural. It arises strongly with enthusiasm. So it's not a prompted chitta, but there might be an occasion where I don't really want to go. We have to get into a car, travel 20, 30 minutes to the ice cream parlor. So somebody says, come, let's go get ice cream. And I think, nah, I don't want to go. Then they say, come on, we'll have a good time, we'll enjoy ourselves. And so they use some persuasion. And then finally I agree, say, okay, I'll go. And as we're going, the greed for the ice cream is arising. So this will be a prompted chitta, because somebody is persuading me to, in this case, to go get ice cream. Or sometimes I will prompt myself. I might be reluctant to do something, but then I reflect that there are certain benefits in doing this thing that will serve me in some way to bring me some benefits. So in this way, by convincing myself to engage in that unwholesome action connected with greed, the chitta is prompted. So we have certain chittas are prompted, certain chittas are unprompted. So in that way, when you take these three dichotomies, you take their permutations, we get 8 chittas rooted in greed. Okay, then we come to the 2 chittas rooted in aversion or hatred. And actually, aversion, hatred are really just two designations for the same state. And what's interesting in the Abhidharma is that it assigns both chittas rooted in hatred to the feeling that accompanies those chittas is one of displeasure, mental pain. So we might think that, for example, a bully who is bullying, say, the little kid at the schoolyard, you might think that he's getting some pleasure from bullying the little kid. But according to the Abhidhamma, at this moment when states of hatred are arising, those states of hatred are accompanied by unpleasant feeling, by a painful feeling. But the pleasure that arises comes from other sources. But the individual citta accompanied by hatred or by aversion is accompanied by the accompanying feeling is displeasure. And then these chittas, they're never associated with a view. They're always dissociated from view, but they might be, in some cases, they occur spontaneously, in which they are unprompted, and in other cases, they're prompted. For example, if I spontaneously give rise to hatred, to anger, and attack somebody, that would be an unprompted citta driven by hatred. Where if somebody arouses me and says that those people are our enemies, they are opposed to our interests, we have to attack them. In that case, when the hatred arises, it's prompted. It seems a bit curious to me, and here I'm in a bit disagreement with the Abhidhamma. It seems that there can be, in my mind, states of mind accompanied by view that are driven by hatred. But I think the Abhidhamma is formulated against the background of the ancient Indian philosophical points of view, according to which views are always rooted in craving or greed. Okay, then we come to the third set of unwholesome chittas. So those are the two that are rooted in strong delusion without an admixture of greed or hatred. And these two states of mind, both of them are accompanied by indifferent feeling, neutral feeling. One of these, let me take number 12 first, is accompanied by restlessness. Now, restlessness is said to be present in all unwholesome states of mind. But in the first 10, or even first 11, the restlessness is eclipsed or overpowered by these stronger unwholesome factors, greed, hatred, or doubt. But in citta number 12, those factors are absent, greed, hatred, and doubt. So here, restlessness becomes a prominent feature of the citta. And then citta number 11 is that citta accompanied by doubt. And what's meant here by doubt is specifically, we call this spiritual doubt. It's not doubt about how the weather will be tomorrow or what the stock market will be like in a few days, but it's doubt about whether the Buddha is a fully enlightened teacher, whether the Dharma discloses the true nature of things, whether there are enlightened beings that constitute the Sangha, or whether the path or training leads to liberation from suffering. So this is spiritual doubt. Okay, so that takes us through now the unwholesome states of consciousness, the 12 unwholesome chittas. And maybe I should add something about numerical sets. I think we have to take the numerical sets laid out in the Abhidhamma with maybe with a grain of salt, not take them too literally as a scientific, precise scientific account of the mind, but just a theoretical model of the kinds of states of consciousness that we have to deal with in our spiritual practice. Okay, I see that time is running low, so I'm going to run just very quickly through the rootless citas, not deal with them at length. And to make them clear when we really have to go into a lot of other factors. Am I still sharing the screen? Yeah, I
Yes,
think it's
we are
shared.
still, yes, we're still seeing your screen, Venerable.
Okay. Okay,
Wonderful.
So let us just go very quickly through the rootless citas. So these are states of consciousness that don't have either unwholesome roots like greed, hatred, and delusion, or the beautiful, wholesome roots like non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And so first we have 15 resultant citas, unwholesome resultants, and these include the 5 types of sensory consciousness: eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. Then some other consciousnesses, one called the receiving consciousness, the investigating consciousness. I won't be going into their specific functions because of time limits. Then corresponding to these, there are wholesome resultants. So 5 sensory types of consciousness, which are the results of wholesome karma: consciousness arising through eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Then corresponding the receiving consciousness, and 2 types of investigating consciousness. And then there are 3 functional um, rootless types of consciousness. One is called the 5-door adverting. So that is a citta that turns to an object at any of the 5 sense doors when it first arrives. The mind door adverting, a consciousness, a state of consciousness that turns to the mind door when a thought or idea or mental object arises. And then number 18 is a rather odd citta, which I've never really been able to figure out. It's called the smile producing consciousness. It's a citta that's said to arise only in the Buddha, in Buddhas or Arhats, when they smile without a real specific reason for their smile. So these are the rootless types of consciousness. And now let's move on to the types of beautiful consciousness, the sense sphere beautiful consciousness. Okay, I'm going to base this on the wholesome. So we have in the sense sphere beautiful cittas, we have distinctions of the wholesome. That's what we're primarily concerned with in our everyday life, developing the wholesome, developing good, beautiful qualities of mind. Then there are cittas that result from those wholesome states of mind. And then we'll come to the functional, beautiful cittas. Okay, the wholesome cittas, we have, you see, they're distinguished first by way of feeling. So the beautiful or wholesome cittas are accompanied either by joyful feeling or by neutral feeling, which is called equanimity. So we have 4 types of each. But then we have, so that is the first basis for distinction, the feeling, the accompanying feeling. Then we have the distinction whether the state of consciousness is accompanied by knowledge. And by knowledge here would not be like intellectual knowledge, factual knowledge, scientific knowledge, but this would be spiritual insight, or at least some understanding connected with the spiritual path. And knowledge represents the third wholesome root. So the sense sphere wholesome chittas are chittas that are accompanied by the beautiful roots. The beautiful roots are non-greed, or which could also be represented as generosity and detachment, renunciation. The second is non-hatred, which manifests as loving kindness, goodwill, benevolence. And the third wholesome root is wisdom, understanding, or insight. And now all beautiful chittas are accompanied by the first two beautiful roots, non-greed and non-hatred. But not all beautiful chittas are accompanied by the third beautiful root, which is non-delusion, which manifests as wisdom, insight, or knowledge. And so those chittas accompanied by knowledge are chittas with three beautiful roots. So they have non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, whereas those chittas dissociated from knowledge have only the two beautiful roots, non-greed, non-greed, and non-hatred. And then we have the distinction whether the citta is prompted or unprompted. If it's unprompted, it arises spontaneously. For example, I see a worthy cause and I'm motivated to make a donation, so I make that donation spontaneously. On the other hand, somebody might persuade me, you should give, that's a worthy cause, please develop some compassion and make a donation. In that case, I make the donation with a mind of generosity, but it's a prompted citta. So each of these types can be distinguished as either prompted or unprompted. So in that way, we take these three distinctions and we take their permutations, we get 8 types of sense sphere wholesome consciousness. Each of these has its corresponding result, which is the resultant consciousness, which arises when conditions ripen in the course of our life. Then the functional beautiful consciousness, these are states of mind similar to the 4 wholesome states of mind, but the functional chittas are the chittas that occur in the Buddha or in arhats. They're not called wholesome, even though they're beautiful, because wholesome chittas create karma, and the Buddhas and the arhats have eradicated the underlying roots of karma. And so their beautiful activities do not create karma. And so therefore their chittas are called functional rather than wholesome. But in terms of their manifestations, they're exactly like the wholesome. So in this way, we get 24, is it 24? 8 by 3, 24 types of beautiful sense sphere chittas. Okay, now I'm going to go rather quickly through the remaining types of chittas. Okay, now we come to the fine material sphere. Okay, the fine material sphere chittas, these are the chittas that occur in the states of deep samadhi, meditative absorption, that are called the jhanas. In Sanskrit, these will be the jhanas. So these are states of mind that arise when one focuses upon a single object and repeatedly directs the mind to that object, a meditative object, until in stages the mind goes more and more deeply into that object and then attains absorption. So in these suttas, we find 4 jhanas, but in the Abhidhamma, the jhanas are enumerated as 5 because it makes a finer distinction in the first jhana between states with initial application and sustained application and states without initial application and sustained application. Okay, so we have in the Abhidhamma system 5 states of meditative absorption, and these states are distinguished by the refinement of the mental factors that determine the nature of that absorption. And so you could see as one progresses from the lower jhana to the higher jhana, certain factors get eliminated and the degree of one-pointedness or samadhi becomes stronger. And so we have 5 wholesome states of meditative absorption, 5 wholesome fine material sphere chittas when ordinary people attain the jhanas. And these jhanas have their results, their corresponding resultants. And when arahats and Buddhas enter into the jhana, their jhana chittas are called functional chittas, functional states of mind. But the important point for us are the 5 types of wholesome chittas. So when one is in a meditative absorption, the chittas occurring in that meditative absorption would be the chittas of the fine material sphere, and depending on the level of absorption, either first jhana, second, third, fourth, or fifth jhana chittas. Okay, now if the meditator wishes to go further in their practice of samadhi, they can strengthen the force of their concentration So after reaching the 5th jhana and mastering the 5th jhana, a meditator might want to go to the next level of samadhi, of concentration, and that is the level of the immaterial or formless meditative attainments. And the chittas, states of mind that occur in those attainments, are called the immaterial sphere chittas. And if you're familiar with the sutta literature, you know about have encountered these 4 meditative attainments: the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. In these attainments, one is not eliminating mental factors to rise to the next level, but rather one is changing the object. One is replacing a coarser object with a subtler object. So to attain the base of infinite space, one replaces the object of the jhana, the particular brilliant form of jhanic absorption, with the image or mental image of boundless infinite space. And then to move to the base of infinite consciousness, one focuses upon that consciousness of infinite space that was occurring in the first attainment. Then to move to the base of nothingness, one focuses upon what we might call the unobstructive or unimpeding nature of the base of infinite consciousness, and then to attain the fourth meditative absorption, formless absorption, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, one focuses on the consciousness present in the base of nothingness. I know these sound rather abstract, and I can't speak about this from direct experience, but that is the way these states are described in the Abhidharma. Okay, now, important point to bear in mind is that all of these states of meditative absorption, the jhanas and the immaterial attainments, are still mundane states in themselves. They are not states of genuine liberation, but they can be used as a basis for, or a platform for developing wisdom. And so within the Buddhist system of meditation, system of early Buddhism, these meditations, the jhanas and the immaterial absorptions, are not ends in themselves, but they are taken as a basis of samadhi from which one proceeds to develop vipassana, or insight into the true nature of existence, the characteristics of phenomena. And when that insight reaches its culmination, its peak, its high point, it brings about the arising of the supramundane or world transcending consciousness, the consciousness that culminates in liberation. And so that takes us to the supramundane consciousness. And so when the insight into the three characteristics of impermanence, dukkha or suffering, and non-self, when that insight reaches, it becomes extremely powerful and reaches its culmination, at the first level, it brings the path of stream entry, which is a single citta called the Sotapatti Magga Citta, the path consciousness of stream entry, which takes as its object the unconditioned state nibbana, and it has the function of permanently eradicating three of the defilements that keep us bound to the cycle of birth and death. The three defilements are the view of a self, second, doubt about the Buddha and his teaching, and the third is clinging to false observances and ascetic practices with the view that they can give liberation. And so once one reaches the path of stream entry, then one is assured of reaching final liberation, the end of the cycle of birth and death, in a maximum of 7 more lives. And then the path consciousness of stream entry is followed immediately by the corresponding fruit consciousness. This is the palacita, the fruit consciousness of stream entry. So the path consciousness has the function of eradicating certain defilements, whereas the fruit consciousness has the function of experiencing momentarily the bliss of liberation made possible by the attainment of the path. Okay, the next path consciousness, suppose the meditator wants to go further and to reach liberation in this life itself. So they'll continue with their practice of insight meditation, developing their panya or wisdom further until they reach the path of once returning. And that path is a single citta called the path consciousness of once returning, which weakens greed, hatred, and delusion. It doesn't eradicate any defilements, but it weakens greed, hatred, and delusion to the extent that the meditator now will return to the human realm at most only one more time, where they might be reborn in the heavenly realms, and then they'll reach liberation there. And the path of once returning is followed immediately by the fruit of once returning. But now the meditator is not even satisfied with the state of once returning, so they go on to develop their insight, their wisdom, and at the third level, they reach the path of non-returning. So now, with this consciousness, they eradicate sensual craving and ill will. So those are the two factors or two defilements that bind us to the sense realm of existence. So a meditator who reaches the path of non-returning, immediately they experience the fruit of non-returning. And when they pass away, if they don't go further, they'll be reborn in the Brahma world, the divine realm, and they'll reach final liberation there without ever coming back to the desire or sensual realm of existence. Whoops. Okay, but now we have the meditator go still further and they continue. They're not satisfied even with the state of non-returning. So they develop their insight, their wisdom still further. And if all conditions come together, then they will attain the path of arhatship, which is a single citta, a single momentary state of consciousness, which eradicates all the residual defilements, the residual craving, and the residual ignorance. And so they cut off all defilements, all the fetters and bonds. Momentarily, they experience the fruit of arahatship. And with this attainment, they are completely liberated from the cycle, the round of repeated birth and death. Okay, so I think this will do as a kind of very quick, rapid detour through the states of consciousness enumerated in the Pali Abhidharma system. And as I said, in this 1 hour, I've covered material that in the earlier program I covered in 2.5 days. So if you want to get everything treated in detail, you can go to, again, I repeat, go to YouTube, look up my name, and look up Abhidharma Retreat 2013. Okay, should we throw the floor open to questions?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. A beautiful teaching. So our first question for you, Bhikkhu Bodhi, when you reflect on your decades of practice, what aspect of the Dharma has continued to reveal deeper layers of truth, even after years of apparent mastery? And there are two more parts to the question. What Dharma themes do you find yourself contemplating most often now in your mature years of practice? And are they different from what occupied your mind as a young monk?
Yeah, of course, this gets into very personal matters, but I really thought questions should be dealing not so much with me and my personal experience and reflections, but more with the topic of the talk today.
Sure. Okay. Abhidharma is so complex that it seems a lay practitioner can't live long enough to understand it. Should we be concerned about this?
Okay, so this explains what has happened, I think, in the historical development of the Abhidharma. So we start off canonically with the Abhidharma Pitaka, which is 7 volumes. And the 7 volumes are extremely dry, technical, complicated. And if you try to read them on their own without any coaching, it's a little bit like reading a telephone book to try to understand people the human mind by looking at names in a telephone book. Okay, so what has happened is that commentaries developed to explain the canonical Abhidhamma texts. So each of the major books of the Abhidhamma has its commentary, and sometimes the commentaries are difficult, so they developed a next level, which is the level of sub-commentaries. So when you take all of that massive material, you think I can never get into the Abhidhamma. It's a little bit like trying to cross the North American continent by walking. So what happened, starting maybe in the 8th century, 9th century, 10th century, is that compendia were compiled, manuals of Abhidhamma, to compress the essence of the Abhidhamma into short manuals of, could be like 50 to 100 pages, which comprise the essence of the Abhidhamma teachings. So in the Theravada tradition, the major Abhidhamma text, the major manual used for the study of Abhidhamma is called the Abhidhammata Sangaha, which I had published in a translation and with explanatory guide called the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. So I'd say if you want to understand the Pali Abhidhamma system, you can begin with the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. And once you've worked through that manual, then you can take up the canonical Abhidhamma texts. And I would recommend just taking the Dhammasangani, the first book, and the Vibhanga, the second book. And that should give a very solid basis for understanding the Abhidhamma.
Thank you.
And in the Northern tradition or Savastivada tradition, there is the work, maybe that's the work you've been using. It's used in the Tibetan system and the Chinese system. It's the Abhidharma Kosha, which with its commentary comes to, I have it in about 5 volumes.
Thank you. What is the goal of explaining the Abhidharma to lay people? What is one of the most important teachings for lay people from the Abhidharma?
Yeah, well, I
Should
think
we study?
Okay, go on.
Should we study deeper into texts, since we will be mostly trying to achieve basic levels of meditation?
Yeah, well, I think from a practical level, I always recommend going to study the suttas rather than the Abhidhamma, because in the suttas, one finds the sort of more practical teachings. As I said, the teaching in the suttas has the practical or pragmatic orientation, whereas the Abhidhamma, as I see it, is a more theoretical approach to the Dhamma, which attempts to construct a comprehensive framework which can include and systematize the many different teachings of the Buddha. But I would say if one looks at the Abhidhamma after coming through the sutras, one could see that the purpose of the Abhidhamma is to show, as I said in my introductory remarks, to show the particular qualities of mind or states of mind that are to be avoided, to be overcome, to be eliminated. Those would be the defilements or the akusala mental factors, the unwholesome mental factors, then the beautiful and wholesome states of mind that are to be developed, cultivated, and intensified in order to contribute to our spiritual development. And then those particular sequences of wholesome mental factors that are to be developed in order to gain the goal of the Buddha's teaching, which is realization, enlightenment, and liberation. Yeah, but from the purely pragmatic standpoint, I would say the basis should be teachings that we find in the suttas, like from the meditative aspect, particularly the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Thank you. Can you explain a bit more about the difference between craving and greed?
The way they are treated in the Abhidhamma, they are treated virtually as synonyms or sort of different terms representing the same thing, though in English they have different connotations. I think in English, greed pertains particularly, I would say, to usually to money or to power or to greed, particularly to wealth and to power, whereas craving seems to be more general, the incessant or insistent desire to obtain anything that in the absence of which one feels dissatisfied. So the Pali word for craving, or the Pali word that's translated as craving, is tanha, which is also represented in Pali as tasina, in Sanskrit trishna, which is connected to the English word thirst. So just as when we have a thirst for something, for water, we feel this compulsion to obtain water to satisfy our thirst. So when the mind is driven by tanha, by craving, we can never feel satisfied until we obtain that particular object of desire.
Thank you. Can you say a little bit more about the difference between delusion and wrong views in the mapping of cheetahs?
Yeah, that's an interesting, important question. So delusion, and again, the English word delusion is somewhat misleading, but it's a standard rendering. And delusion is equated with avidya or avidya, which is ignorance. And it's distinct from wrong view, but closely connected with wrong view. So I would say delusion or ignorance is the absence of correct knowledge. It's a kind of mental blindness or obscuration of the mind. But it is out of that obscuration, absence of correct knowledge, that we formulate theoretical models for understanding the nature of things. And the particular type of view that the Buddhist teaching focuses on as a negative quality is wrong view. And the particular types of wrong views that the Buddha usually focuses on are the views that posit the existence of a truly real, substantial, autonomous self. And then out of that assumption of a self, one formulates more elaborate views describing the nature of the self. And so we could say that ignorance is the absence of a correct understanding of anatta or shunyata, the empty, selfless nature of things. So simply not knowing, not understanding emptiness or selflessness. Whereas wrong view is the formulation of a theoretical view, a conceptual view, which posits the existence of a self, which posits the existence of a substantial world as the counterpart of the self, and then elaborates upon the nature of the self and the nature of the world based upon one's proclivities, one's dispositions.
Thank you. We have some questions here about the cheetahs. Can
Yeah.
only one cheetah arise at a time, no matter what it is?
Yeah, exactly.
How can these classifications of the cheetahs be used in meditation for liberating insight?
It's an interesting question because I have to confess that I have never used this model of cheetahs as a basis for my own practice. But one could find in, and maybe this is for those who have reached like stronger levels of meditation than I've reached myself, but one can find in chapter 4 in the comprehensive manual of Abhidharma a description of the process or sequence of cheetahs leading to the states of jhana, meditative absorption, and the sequence of cheetahs leading to the path and the fruit. So if one feels close in one's meditation, close to the jhanas, or in one's practice of insight, close to path and fruit, one could look at the description of the process of citas in that particular chapter, in chapter 4. Like the topic of chapter 4 is you see these citas, I've just described them pretty much in the abstract, but in the Abhidharma, they are posited to occur in particular sequences. So there's a sequence of sensory consciousness, a sequence of citas that occur in leading up to and culminating in the jhanic attainments, and sequence of citas occurring in the process leading to the paths and fruits. And so that would require like a whole different lecture.
Thank you. With regard to the unwholesome citas, what is the significance of prompted classification? Does whether or not something is prompted lead to different results?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think the formulators of the Abhidharma broaden that distinction because, and actually it's based in the suttas. There is a sutta which distinguishes whether citas are prompted or unprompted. And I would say because citas on the unwholesome side, citas that are unprompted, that arise spontaneously, will produce stronger negative effects than citas that are prompted, because then one either has to persuade oneself or somebody has to pressure you to do something unwholesome. So the result would be milder if it's prompted and stronger if it's unprompted. Whereas on the wholesome side, when a wholesome citta is spontaneous or unprompted, the results, the beneficial results will be stronger than when the wholesome citta is prompted.
Thank you. Dear Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, thank you for your teaching. Could you elaborate on the restlessness aspect? Can we see it as the pull to engage with that state, or is it different? Thank you for the clarification.
The last phrase, the pull to engage.
Pull to engage with that state, like this restlessness, this restless aspect.
Yeah, I think this would just be, perhaps you could see that most clearly when your mind is not particularly overrun by thoughts of desire, craving, yearning for something, not particularly riled by irritation, annoyance, ill will towards anybody, but there's just this kind of restless agitation of the mind. And when you look into that state of mind, then you could see that this is the restless state of mind. And I think that restless state of mind, it's pinpointed in the sutta scheme of the 5 hindrances, which are the hindrances to meditative practice. Number 4 is uddhacca kukucca, restlessness and regret. And so there the Buddha has distinguished uddhacca, restlessness, as one of the hindrances to meditative practice. Yeah, but if you look sort of deeply when the mind is driven by greed or by ill will, you'll also see that there's restlessness present in those states. But even when those states are absent, sometimes the mind is just unable to settle down. In that case, the restlessness is the prominent factor.
Beloved Bhikkhu Bodhi, what is the distinction or point of view between the Pali Abhidharma and the Tibetan Abhidharma Kosha?
To answer that question, you would need somebody who is truly a scholar of both systems of Abhidharma. And I haven't been able to study the Sarvastivada Abhidharma in any length. And to answer that question, probably you would need somebody who was a scholar in both Abhidharma systems and is ready to give an hour-long lecture or even a 3-day course on a comparative study of the 2-day Abhidharma systems. But I did find some years ago, I found in a book on the Savastivada Abhidharma a list of the mental factors in the Abhidharma, in the Savastivada Abhidharma, and looked at them in comparison with the mental factors in the Pali Abhidharma, and I found some interesting differences. One of the differences that I recall is that the mental factor of mindfulness, sati in Pali, smriti in Sanskrit, in the Pali system, mindfulness is considered a beautiful mental factor, which is present only in wholesome or in beautiful states of consciousness, and not present in the unwholesome or neutral states of consciousness. Whereas in the Savastivada Abhidharma, the mental factor of smriti is said to be present in all states of consciousness. So I think the Savastivada Abhidharma is taking smriti not in the sense of mindfulness, the way we use it as a meditative practice, but in the older sense of memory. So there's the capacity for remembering any experience that's present in any state of consciousness. But that's just one difference, and I'm not sure whether my understanding is correct. I would have to review that particular point.
Thank you. I think, Bhikkhu Bodhi, we might be up to our last question. I don't know if you'd like to take this question. It's asking you, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, do you find that study of the Abhidharma informs your meditation practice?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I don't really rely so much, let us say, I don't rely on this particular classification of states of consciousness for um, for understanding and interpreting my own meditative experience, but rather, let us say, some of the principles that enter into that scheme of classification of states of consciousness would be relevant to my own meditation practice. And that would be the distinction between the unwholesome and wholesome states of mind, and particularly whether the state of mind is governed by greed, aversion, delusion, or without greed, without aversion, without delusion. But that particular distinction, or way of distinguishing and defining states of mind, we find already in the Satipatthana Sutta. So I take the classification of the chittas in the Satipatthana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 10, the third foundation of mindfulness, as sufficient for my own practice of meditation. I don't have to go into all of the detailed distinctions that the Abhidharma makes between the 12 types of unwholesome citta, 8 types of wholesome citta, and so forth.
Venerable, thank you so much for your time and your generosity in sharing so many years of such diligent study and practice. And so, yeah, on behalf of the community, thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Alexandria back to have some closing remarks. Thank you, Alexandria.
Thank you, Tsumala. And yes, wow, what a beautiful and deeply meaningful event. Just repeating the deep thanks from all of us to you, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, for being here with us today, and for you too, Tsumala, for holding the interview container with such care. We are all so fortunate to be connected to these precious teachings that reveal the mind and its functioning, supporting us to recognize more clearly the causes of suffering and how to transcend that. And just personally, Venerable Law, I was so touched by, just your passion for this topic, and the practice just came through as you were listing off all the chittas. You were just we could feel your delight. So thank you so much for sharing that with us all. Links that Venerable Law shared, including those related to his affiliated institutions, complementary materials, and the book that he referenced, are all available both through the resources link here on Zoom and in the YouTube event description, and they also will be listed under the Tergar event. I'd also like to take this time to give a thank you to our incredible team of translators, making it possible for all to listen in ways that are most beneficial to them. So thank you, Altier, Danny, Laura, Olga, Paul, and Patrick. And a deep thank you to my support team, Lucy, Stella, Eduardo, and Fernando, and Valeria. They're the ones who really make this a smooth experience. And lastly, a heartfelt thanks to all of you watching and following along. Events like this are only as rich as the hearts and minds that fill it. So thank you all for showing up and being here. In fact, we ended up with almost 1,000 individuals in total. Truly amazing. And now before we sign off for today, we would like to show you just some of the upcoming Tergar events and programs. So I'll give a moment for thank you, Fernando, to share that. So this webinar with Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi is part of, as you all know, of the Buddhist psychology transmission. Mingyur Rinpoche has collected different meditations practices throughout the Abhidharma literature and has compiled them to create a meditation manual for us modern-day practitioners. In the Buddhist Psychology Immersion course, we are exploring meditations from Rinpoche's new manual, and new modules are released every month that you can explore at your own pace. Thank you. This week, we have just released new lessons with Rinpoche's meditation instructions on the close application of mindfulness to the mind. This directly relates to what we have just heard and received from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. And just to remind you that this immersion includes over 40 exclusive video teachings from Mingyur Rinpoche, covering all chapters of Stainless Prajna, his own work, more than 40 guided meditations and practices for daily life, live sessions, and one-on-one interviews with Vajrayana online guides, and access to a draft translation of Rinpoche's new meditation manual, which for me, I feel that's quite exciting to kind of get to look behind scenes. Thank you. Next slide. As a member of the Vajrayana online community, you'll receive access to more than 25 courses and weekly live sessions. You can learn more and join now at vajrayana.tergar.org if you're not already a member. Thank you for sharing the links, and the resources is also now being posted in the YouTube chat. And the final slide, thank you. Finally, we invite you to join us for our upcoming retreat, June 6th through 8th, with Mingyur Rinpoche, where he'll be guiding us through the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So this is a practice retreat. That weekend will be your final opportunity within this transmission to work directly with Rinpoche on these profound and essential teachings from his new meditation manual, Stainless Prajna. At this retreat, you'll learn how to meditate on the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and air, how to apply the 4 foundations of mindfulness in both meditation and daily life, and how to recognize impermanence, multiplicity, and interdependence in all experiences. So drawing from his new meditation manual, Rinpoche will provide step-by-step guidance through the 11 chapters of essential analytical meditation practices. And perhaps you can't join the previous retreat or haven't yet explored the courses related to Abhidharma. No problem, no worry. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are accessible and open to everyone. And it is a rare chance to get to learn these practices directly from Rinpoche. So you'll find the registration link in the Zoom resources and also the YouTube chat. And we certainly hope to see you there. And so now we would like to sign off and give our final thank you and goodbye. And karma willing, we will see you all next time. Thank you again for being here, and take care. Have a lovely rest of your morning, day, evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you so much. Really,
Okay.
really a joy. Thank you. Yeah, and if the other Tergar folks want to turn their camera on, we can do a spontaneous goodbye. Yeah. Yeah, and Venerable, I will say, while it maybe the Chitta mind was not spontaneous, I would say that you had many a smiling minds
Mm.
as we were listening. Yeah.
Mm.
So thank you so much again for being here. Yeah, and now you can start to see all the people. The chat's open, so thank you from everyone. Yeah, it's quite lovely. Well, take care, Venerable Lot,
Okay.
and
Okay.
thank you again. Thank you for
Okay,
all
so
the
thank you. Okay.